From all the way from Canada, please help me welcome our keynote speaker in the person of Honorable Alioune Ndiaye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Pearl. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first start by expressing all my gratitude to the African Leadership Group and to my friend and brother, Papa Dia, for allowing me to be part of this very important event. I think somebody was telling today during the panel that the Senegalese embassy in the USA should be moved in Denver, but I think I will go further. I think the African Union headquarters, given the audience I've seen here today, should be moved in Denver. And even more, given the audience, the multicultural audience that we have here today, I think also even the UN headquarters should be moved in Denver. So just to say that I'm very appreciative of the invitation you have extended to me, and also the fact that today we have a multicultural audience means a lot, because most of the time when people express their passion about Africa, they tend to make it some sort of an exclusive passion, which means just a passion for Africa and not for anything else. But let's remember, the journey of human being on this earth has started in Africa. So in every human being, there is a part of an African. So we should be aware of that. So a passion for Africa should be a passion for all mankind. And I'm really glad that African Leadership Group is aware of that, and through this audience try to invite all nationalities to be part of their events. So when my friend Papa Dia called me and asked me if I would come and deliver a speech to this event, I didn't have a single second of hesitation, or maybe I just have to set the record a little bit. After I spoke to my wife and she gave me the approval, I didn't have a single second of hesitation. Because for me, I was telling myself this would be an important moment to do what I've been doing for the last years, which is spread Afro-optimism. I think so far, Africa has been held under a very bad image, under a very bad press. And we don't do that work which is spreading optimism, which is showing that even though we may see some events that we don't like, even though we may see sometimes war being waged in certain countries, we may see civil war in certain countries, there is a bright future ahead for African continent. And I'm going through this speech through facts and figures to tell you why the future of the African continent is bright. First, I would like to speak about the economy. In May 2000, the London-based financial magazine The Economist had a gloomy headline where one could read, "Africa, the hopeless continent." 10 years later, the same magazine completely changed its perspective on the continent by a much different headline, "Africa, the hopeful continent." African economies have been recording for the last 15 years a sustained and important growth, with some countries even reaching double-digit growth rates. Between 2000 and 2010, Africa's economy has grown 1% annually, which represents twice the pace of its growth in the 80s and the 90s. While natural resources have played a great role in this growth, amounting to almost 24% of it, and to those of you who don't like figures, I'm sorry, but in order to shovel away all this misconception and misrepresentation about Africa, I think we need to bring the facts. And that's what I'm trying to do in this speech. So while natural resources have played a great role in this growth, amounting to almost 24% of it, other sectors were instrumental in achieving these tremendous results. They include wholesale and retail, 13%, agriculture, transport, telecommunications, manufacturing, financial services, construction, and real estate. During the same time frame, annual flow of foreign direct investment into Africa increased from 9 billion in 2000 to 62 billion in 2010, according to McKinsey. And talking about FDI, and this is something that few people do know, the continent which provides the highest rate of return on foreign investment in the world is Africa. So this is something that few people do know and which could really help into building this newer optimism that I'm advocating for in this speech. Yet, Africa has not reached its full potential with outstanding natural resource endowment, 10% of world reserve on oil, 40% of its gold, 80% on chromium, and 90% of platinum, to name just but a few. Africa has almost 60% of the world uncultivated arable land and a large share of its natural resources. That's why some emerging countries such as China has just understood that. China and India, by the way, they have understood that doing business with Africa can help their economies grow at a faster pace. The decade 2000-2010 has been labeled as Indian decade due to the excellent performance of the Indian economy after the reform initiated by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. It is no surprise that during this time frame, India has increased its trade relations with Africa, sourcing natural resources from the continent, but also engaging in huge investments in telecommunication, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure. India's trade with Africa has grown from $3 billion in the early 2000s to almost $70 billion by 2010. One can provide a better evidence on how doing business with Africa can help an economy grow and expand its horizons. China has also engaged Africa, becoming today its first trade partner, hence outweighing traditional partners such as the former colonial powers with a trade volume that amounts at more than $200 billion. China has been extending line of credits to African countries at very favorable rates, providing a diplomatic umbrella in the Security Council for some broke African states so they can avoid international sanctions. It has also been building infrastructure all around the continent. And for the last years, according to Dambisa Moyo, China has built in Africa a network of highway that could cover the distance from Cairo to Cape Town. Many African countries have engaged in important reforms aiming at fostering a more business-friendly environment. In Senegal, for instance, the agency in charge of the promotion of investment is a one-stop shop where a whole set of services ranging from registering your business, having access to key market intelligence and public procurements are made easier for all business people. The same reforms are also carried out in the legal and regulatory framework to make sure that investment in the continent are legally secured. So that's the first part on which I would like to emphasize and make the case for the bright future that is ahead, a growing African economy. The second part can be found in Africa's demography, with what we call a demographic dividend. Africa has the world's largest proportion of young population. Almost 80% of Africa's 1 billion population is under 40. One African out of 2 is under 20 years old. According to the World Bank, Africa will account for 80% of the projected 4 billion increase in the global population by 2100. Its working age population
will increase by 2.1 billion over the same time frame compared to a net global increase of 2 billion. Therefore, it is quite normal that one expects Africa to yield a demographic dividend, with the proportion of the working age population increasing relative to the proportion of children. According to a study that was published by the World Bank, the share of working age population is projected to peak at 65% in 2090, while GDP per capita is expected to peak at around $2,475 in the baseline. Factoring in demographic development causes GDP per capita to rise by 3,865 by 2100. If sub-Saharan Africa, or Africa in general, takes advantage of the demographic dividend, estimates show a potential to add 500 billion per year to its economies for as many as 30 years, the equivalent of the third of Africa's GDP today. The third pillar on which I think Africa can build that bright future which I'm advocating for today is Africa is becoming more and more a democratized continent. Democracy is being part of the cultural process, part of the cultural political life in Africa, and I would like to give you several examples in this speech. While it is difficult to prove beyond any doubt that democracy forcibly leads to economic development, one can argue that an open and democratic society can increase the chances of development through the culture of transparency and good governance it instills in a given country. An open and democratic society can help bring about more transparency in public policy, which in turn can improve the efficiency of public policies. While the 70s and 80s have seen lots of African countries ruled by reckless dictators, the 90s have been an important moment of democratization for the continent within what Samuel Huntington refers to as the third wave of democratization. This process has not stopped since then. And even though it has gone through some hiccups with democratically elected regimes that being overthrown by warlords and military rulers, Africa's democratization process is an unavoidable one which will only move forward. Throughout the continent, elections are being held more and more in peaceful and transparent ways, allowing peaceful transition of the power to opposition parties. And to that regard, we can maybe make note of what happened in Nigeria in April 2015, where Nigeria has amazed the world by organizing peaceful and transparent elections that brought to power President Muhammad Buhari, who also symbolizes the new leadership in Africa we have been making the case for. Countries like Ghana, Benin, Senegal, Cape Verde, to name but a few, are on the process to become major democracies, where election results are known the very day of the polls, much faster than in Florida. So democratization in Africa is also paired with the decrease of armed conflicts, which took their tolls on Africa's economic development in the past decades. Even though some countries are still facing internal armed violence that is linked to terrorist groups such as Boko Haram or to ethnicity, the trend one can easily observe is that Africa has become a more and more stable continent. With conflict prevention and resolution mechanisms such as the Peace and Security Council of the African Union and the mechanisms that are established by the regional economic communities such as the ECOWAS in West Africa or the SADC in Southern Africa, the peaceful settlement of dispute is more and more grounded in African politics. And I would like to also mention some of the African success stories that we rarely talk about and which for me symbolize all these future that we can see if only we could open our eyes. And to that end, I really liked the concept of third future that Mike has just mentioned. I think the brightness of African future probably is linked to that third future he was talking about, which means that it may not be before our eyes, but by looking into it, we can see that the continent is moving on the right way. There is no country, for me, that epitomizes the resilience of African countries like Rwanda. Less than 2 decades after going through one of the worst genocides of the 20th century that has claimed the lives of almost 1 million people, Rwanda is today this vibrant and well-performing economy with one of the most business-friendly environments in Africa. But most importantly, Rwanda is the symbol of a new leadership whereby efficiency and transparency are considered as a core value of public management. In less than 20 years, 1 million people have been pulled out of poverty. Rwanda has recorded such a decrease in child mortality that has never been recorded through the history of mankind. Ethiopia is today lining up double-digit growth rates after having been known in the 80s for hunger and poverty, with the song that most of us know, We Are the World. And I could name all the examples just showing that even though Africa seems still to be considered as a hopeless continent, we have many, many reasons to be hopeful about our future. Africa has also entered a new era in public policy design, where the short-term planning is no longer the golden rule, but rather a long-term planning which aims at bringing about structural reform that can lead to stronger economies. In this regard, one can mention Senegal's Plan Emergent, which aims at building an emerging economy by 2035. These plans are good conductors for private investment insofar as they help lower the uncertainty and make it possible for investors to project themselves in the long run. Through the great projects they are based upon, such plans can be a wonderful market penetration tool for some investors while allowing others to have a wider footprint in these economies. And I would like to wrap up this speech with a brief historical review on how private capital investment has generated most of the political dynamics that shape today's world. This will help us put in perspective how important the theme of today's event is in terms of building this bright future we've been talking about. First, during the Renaissance, where private merchant capitalism has helped create the state as a political entity that organizes public life. Merchant capitalists have provided the lords who were holding the military power with the financial resources as well as the infrastructure and expertise for resource mobilization in exchange for the protection of the lords. That is how the state as we know it today came out to be. Second, the emergence of Western liberal democracies in the 18th and 19th century is also a process in which private capital holders have played their part, especially through the bourgeoisie that was instrumental in all political revolutions. Thirdly, the Industrial Revolution, which opened up our modern era, is a combination of private capital investment and major breakthrough scientific discoveries. All this to say how much this forum can be instrumental to building this bright future for Africa. By investing in Africa, you are not just setting on a mere financial journey, but on a social and human one. You become part of the builders of this bright future by creating opportunities, by making personal dreams come true, or like the poet would say, by expanding the horizons of the possible. And ladies and gentlemen, just to end up my speech, I would like to tell you that Africa is ready. Africa is ready with its fast-growing economies, backed on tremendous natural resources endowment. Africa is ready with its more and more stable democracies, where we find solid civil societies that play the role of watchdog to keep dictators and authoritarian rulers at bay. Africa is ready with its energetic young population, which is more and more educated and poised to take on the challenge of building the prosperous continent that we all dream about. So be ready. Be ready to embark with us on this beautiful journey that will lead to this bright future that we all see for Africa, for the benefits of Africans, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Cape Town to Cairo. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.